Imagine moving into a mansion in Los Angeles, California. Sunny Los Angeles, California. You're surrounded by celebrities, parties, money. The mansion is set on 5 acres of land, has a licensed zoo with exotic animals including spider monkeys, llamas, exotic birds like toucans, flamingos, parakeets, parrots, and there's a lagoon pool with natural looking rock formations, a jacuzzi, a grotto, which is an artificial cave in a body of water. Yes, I had to look that up. Residents of the mansion have 24/7 access to a personal chef and can ask for any meal or drink, day or night, to their liking. And if you're one of the lucky young chosen women with a head full of dreams and the looks, maybe you can even live at the mansion with your own room in it. You'll be given the keys to a luxury car. You'll be given an allowance to buy the high-end designer brands that your friends could only dream of, and invited to all the exclusive elite celebrity parties. Sounds nice, doesn't it? Well, many of the girls thought it sounded nice too. Many of these girls were young women. They saw Playboy as an opportunity to break into the career of their dreams. So, why is it that later on, some of these girls would describe their time in the mansion as an experience that was much, much darker? What went on beyond those mansion walls? Hello, and welcome to my channel, Shade Core. I'm your host, Morgan Vale. I cover true crime and all things shady. Today, we are going to talk about what life was like for some of the playmates in the Playboy Mansion and why it was almost like a cult. But before we get started, I want to mention that I talked about Hugh Hefner last week also on my Spotify channel. So feel free if you want to hop over there, and I will link below if you are more of an audio person. I have a Spotify channel, so that episode is on there. So just to quickly catch you up to speed with what was discussed, I talked last week about Crystal Hefner, who is Hugh Hefner's third wife and widow. And I talked about how on February 17th of this year, Crystal and her lawyers, led by attorney Gloria Allred, spoke at a press conference about how the late Hugh M. Hefner Foundation, which I'll be referring to going forward as HMH Foundation, they voiced their concern at this press conference about how the HMH Foundation has access to about 3,000 of his diaries and scrapbooks, and how some of these girls may not have been informed that there were pictures taken of them. Some of them might have been underage. A lot of these were pictures of intimate acts in the moment. These photos stem back to the 1960s, but some of them may have been under the influence, unaware there were photos being taken for this scrapbook. And now Crystal and her lawyer have filed regulatory complaints to both the DEAs in California as well as in Illinois, because that's where the Playboy headquarters are. They're asking that there is an investigation into these scrapbooks and diaries, because the HMH Foundation is not being clear about what is going to be done with these scrapbooks. However, Hugh Hefner's sons have come out in response to Crystal Hefner, and so that they support it being in a university, the scrapbooks being in a university or a museum. So just imagine how horrifying that would be if you were one of these thousands of women whose photos might be in the scrapbook, and what that would mean with the whole world having access to that, right? So I also talked about how Hugh Hefner hoarded Quaaludes, which were a popular mind-altering substance in the 70s up until the 80s, and that he would call these thigh openers before giving them to girls who were working for Playboy, working at his key clubs, and encourage special favors for those in his elite circles. So that kind of corroborates the concern that these women may have been coerced, under the influence, not so consensual, very blurred lines vibe. So I talked about all that last week, and I will link the Spotify below. Side note, I read Crystal Hefner's book. Oh my gosh, I have it right here. Only Say Good Things, Surviving Playboy and Finding Myself. She is the third wife and widow of Hugh Hefner. And I also read Holly Madison's Down the Rabbit Hole, Curious Adventures and Cautionary Tales of a Former Playboy Bunny. And this was the girlfriend before Crystal Hefner came around that moved out of the Playboy Mansion. And I also watched some episodes of the HBO docuseries, which has Holly Madison as the host. It's called The Playboy Murders. So On top of that, I did some other research, but I would be citing those sources the most. We are going to dive into what Crystal Hefner and some of these other girlfriends of Hugh Hefner's who lived in the Playboy Mansion experienced and why it was kind of like a cult, even though it was not officially a cult. And Hugh Hefner was more like a pimp.
Let's take a look at what a cult is actually made up of. There's a living leader and there's members, and the members have to follow all of the rules or they can be punished. The rules are strict and you can't question them. And the leader gets to choose day-to-day things like the schedule, who can have children, who can have a job, what people's tasks are, what their day-to-day life looks like, from everything from what they eat to what they wear and how they look. And this wasn't too far from how life in the Playboy Mansion was like.
This was a place where freedom came with a price. You have a curfew daily. That curfew was likely 9 p.m. Some days it was 6 p.m. And if Hugh Hefner really liked you, if you were one of his favorite girls, your curfew might be even stricter than others. Your appearance was constantly monitored. The clothes you wear, what color was your hair, your lipstick. You might have even had private investigators tailing behind you without you knowing. You're always being watched. And saying no, well, that has consequences. Every girl around you looks like you. Bleach blonde hair with no roots showing, skinny. The upkeep was unforgiving. These girls had high standards to live up to. They had high end salons where everything was prepaid, but they were all expected to go in asking for the same look. And a lot of the girls eventually requested plastic surgery. Nose jobs, boob jobs, liposuction were the three most common requests, and all to look like clones of each other. And the one person at the very top of it all was none other than the Playboy himself, Hugh Hefner.
And I'm going to talk a bit about the history of the Playboy enterprise here.
For decades, Playboy magazine was at the cutting edge of all things. At its peak in the 70s, the magazine was grossing 5.2 million copies per issue. It was a lifestyle magazine that not only had sexual appeal, yes, of course it did, and that helped it sell with rapid growth, but it also routinely interviewed civil rights activists, including Martin Luther King, Muhammad Ali, Malcolm X. Also, Playboy magazine, on top of that, was not only versed in civil rights issues, they talked about sensational art. Jazz artists such as Miles Davis and Ella Fitzgerald were featured in Playboy magazine, which I didn't know that. So I thought that was interesting. You see, Playboy placed itself in the center of activism for the First Amendment. Ironically, in hindsight, because of what we know now and what I'll get into, but my point is, Playboy was popular. They knew how to get views, you could say, back in the day in the 60s and 70s. They were considered cutting edge, provocative. It popularized the girl next door image. The magazine did, though, face its challenges. Although the 60s and 70s was a time that Playboy blossomed as a supposed revolutionary lifestyle magazine because it included black and white members and workers, it was kind of just a marketing ploy looking back now. Because the more inclusion meant the more consumers who bought into the lifestyle and chased the magazine. Let's not forget, Hugh Hefner was also practically hoarding Quaaludes to give to the girls to lower their inhibitions too. So it was actually a very creepy time, but we didn't know all of that back then.
This video kind of shares the essence of Playboy's success. An interviewer asks Hugh Hefner in the 1960s what his take is on protests and demonstrations, and it's very outdated, but he gets the crowd roaring in laughter when he shares a story that one of his PR people was at a college demonstration where 10 students stripped naked to raise awareness to the issue of gender inequality. And he makes a further remark about how maybe they should have been hanging out at one of the Playboy clubs instead. So this wouldn't be the last time he cracked this joke, but it kind of gives you a sense of how the Times helped with the Playboy's success.
Yes.
I'd like to know your opinion of the demonstration.
Someone from promotion department out there giving a talk, and in the middle of it, 10 students, 4 guys and 6 girls undressed, all the way, I guess. And it was a part of a new campaign related to women's rights. And the notion, I guess, that women and men are basically the same, though that seems like a very odd way to prove it. If they're going to hold any more demonstrations like that, I think they should hold them here. Yes.
With the 1980s, though, the social climate began to shift. That gave Playboy its first taste of becoming outdated because in the 80s, women were joining the workforce. Women were having autonomy. It was also a new era where being a young male bachelor was no longer shocking or deemed progressive like it had once been. That progressive appeal of Playboy as a lifestyle that promoted freedom of speech and sexual revolution, it was starting to fade. The rise of porn was also having an inverse correlation with the magazine sales, which were slowly dwindling.
Starting in 1960, Playboy had began opening these exclusive Playboy clubs all over the place, with the first club being in Chicago, where Hugh Hefner is from. These Playboy clubs became a global sensation, expanding across the US as well as other countries, including various cities in Japan, London, and Manila. It employed thousands of women around the world to work as cocktail waitresses who would wear those Playboy outfits that really helped the brand and image grow. And I didn't realize this, but the outfit that Hugh Hefner kind of seems to get all the credit for was designed by an American woman named Zelda Wynn Valdez, who was also the first woman, African American woman, to ever own a Manhattan boutique shop in 1948. So she actually designed clothes for a lot of famous people, including Gladys Knight, Nat King Cole, Josephine Baker, Mae West, Ella Fitzgerald, and Eartha Kitt. So with the key clubs, while working, these women were known as bunnies, and they served the customers while wearing one-piece corsets with bunny ears and the bunny tails. Members had to purchase keys to be able to visit the key clubs. That's why they were called key clubs, like a physical key with the Playboy logo on it. In fact, these keys had city codes on them. For example, the key would say SF or San Francisco on it if it were for accessing a San Francisco Playboy club. The keys also could specify the rarity of its form. For example, only 8 keys in the world had the code C1 that were ever issued, and C1 key holders were actually said to have the privilege of being allowed to date a Playboy bunny, and Hugh Hefner himself was a C1 key card holder.
And by 1986, sadly for Playboy, the key clubs, every single one of them had closed. With the 1990s came the dawn of the internet. Playboy wasn't keen with it as its competitors was. It was slow to migrate to the internet, and with that, sales dwindled even more. Access to free online pornography then came in the 2000s, further tanking Playboy. But you may be surprised to learn that the magazine didn't run its last print until the year 2020 during COVID. So young girls were still chasing fame and fortune as they do in Los Angeles. Young girls who were highly competitive for the opportunity of a lifetime to jumpstart their careers.
So this kind of brings us to the next topic of initiation. What did these girls have to do to join the Playboy Mansion and live there? In studies of modern day cults, it is said that members are usually targeted by having emotional needs, financial needs, and weaknesses. So in the Playboy Mansion situation, a lot of the girls are much, much younger. For example, Crystal Hefner was 60 years younger than Hugh Hefner, and they all have to engage in a type of ritual before they begin, and I'm about to explain what it is. In her memoir, Crystal talks about how she met Hugh Hefner for the first time ever when she was 21 years old at a Playboy Mansion party in 2008. It was a Halloween party. She came with her friend Allie, and they were dressed up super sexy, and out of a crowd of hundreds of girls, Crystal Hefner felt like she had been chosen. Her friend Allie wasn't chosen. And Crystal Hefner states that Allie was her assertive friend and the reason that she was invited and had a way to get into that party. In her book, she says, "Without her assertiveness, I wouldn't be here. I didn't know then that separating girls from any support was part of the plan, but a part of me knew instinctively that assertiveness was the last thing he was looking for. Growing up, I'd learned other skills, like how to make myself invisible, be polite, fit in, go with the flow." So, as you can see, in this situation, it makes her a perfect fit for the kind of girls he wants to groom. And as always, Hugh Hefner had a stock of young women with him, and with him were the Shannon twins, who I did a little bit of research. They were 18 at the time that they met Hugh Hefner. So that is really disturbing because at this Halloween party, Crystal is 21 years old. That means Hugh Hefner was 81 when he was with the Shannon twins or around that age. So just all very groomy and disgusting. The age difference is absolutely unacceptable. Hugh Hefner accused the Shannon twins to lure Crystal and her new friend Amber that she makes, who was just there a day ago, who had already participated in this initiation, up the stairs where Hugh Hefner grabs a bottle of baby oil. He has large screen 70s porn playing in the background and has all the girls get into these silk pajamas, which is something he always does. She says he grabbed a bottle of baby oil off the nightstand and oiled himself up. Then he looked at the four of us and waited. He gave an impatient, questioning smile and opened his hands in a gesture that suggested, "Who's first? Let's get a move on." There were no condoms in sight, but I wasn't going to be the one to bring it up. The Shannon twins kind of pushed Amber towards Hef, and I admired her confidence to just jump on top. She says there was no kissing or romance or intimacy. Later, I would learn that this was a well-oiled and well-practiced sequence of events, one that went the same exact way every time. The steps: picking some girls from the party and bringing them up. Changing into the uniform for the job, silk pajamas. The dimming of the lights, the music, the porn, passing the pot, and then the sex. Even that first night, even on cloud nine, it all felt odd and robotic, like Hef was just going through the motions of something that had once been fun and sexy. Or maybe it was never fun. And after that is when Crystal begins her trial period of living at the mansion because she had gone through the initiation. She was invited to live there. Now let's jump over to Holly Madison, who prior to that dated Hugh Hefner for 7 years. In her 2000-2001 meeting with Hugh Hefner, Holly Madison has a very similar experience that corroborates this story. She said that she wanted a place to stay. Holly Madison actually had dreams of becoming an actress, and she was invited one night to go out with Hugh Hefner and his girls. So Hugh Hefner is on the dance floor with Holly Madison. She's fresh-faced and dancing with him when he offers her Quaaludes. And he says, "Back in the 70s, they called these thigh openers." And she politely declines and continues to drink until she is then plastered, which is extremely disturbing, not only because of the age difference between Hugh Hefner and the girls, but it makes you wonder how many women were deeply intoxicated when Hugh Hefner tried to initiate or bring them back to his mansion. Holly Madison states in her book, "On the limo ride back to the mansion, Candace leaned over and whispered to me that all of the girls, myself included, were expected to join Hef in his bedroom." So Candace is one of Hef's girlfriends at the time. "She had a smile on her face as she watched me absorb this news, which I immediately registered as odd, almost as if she relished my shock. Because for the better part of the years, the girlfriends went out of their way to convince me that no one actually was intimate with Hef. I wasn't an idiot. Despite their staunch denials, it was still a widely accepted public theory that Hef slept with all of his girlfriends. But when I asked about it directly, they were incredibly convincing, acting almost appalled by the idea." So all the girlfriends of Hefner's were expected to sleep with him, just to make that clear. And they all had to participate in these pajama sleepover orgies where there was baby oil and 70s porno with music blasting in the screens in the room. Later, Holly in her book states, "The girlfriends and Vicky, it seemed in particular, were desperate to bring as many new girls up into the bedroom as possible." Just to backpedal, Vicky was the girl who kind of initiated in Holly Madison, encouraging her to come upstairs with Hugh Hefner after they were at the bar. "The girlfriends and Vicky, it seemed to me in particular, were desperate to bring as many new girls up into the bedroom as possible. With more fresh meat available for Hef, it was less likely that they'd be called on to have sex with their quote-unquote boyfriend as often. Hef could keep up with only so many girls in the night, so I saw it. Vicky had quickly figured out that recruiting new girls effectively achieved two goals at once. Not only would she most likely avoid having sex with Hef, but she'd also earn his favor by bringing around pretty new young things for his enjoyment. Of course, at the time, I knew none of this."
Getting into Hugh Hefner's close circle may have felt like a choice, but was it really a choice? Before you even stepped into the mansion, there were expectations, and oftentimes these expectations blurred the lines of what was considered consensual. One of the most disturbing things I learned was that Hugh Hefner didn't wear condoms and the girls didn't use birth control. And yes, every girl that lived in the mansion had already had to sleep with Hugh Hefner. In her book, Holly Madison talks about how a lot of the playmates act like they never slept with Hugh Hefner and it was just a facade, but it was actually expected to sleep with Hugh Hefner. And she went on to say that some of the girls actually engaged in sex acts with Hugh Hefner without knowing what the aftermath would be. They didn't know if they were going to be promised a place to stay
Or a cover on a magazine of Playboy.
so it was really a gamble, but they just knew that it was expected of them. And on top of that, they had to risk their health, they had to risk catching STDs Hugh Hefner had a personal doctor on staff who would, as Crystal quoted, treat the girls if anybody caught anything. And in her book, Crystal states that the girls were getting sick from all the baby oil that Hugh Hefner liked to use. And at one point, it was so bad that the girls were swapping out his baby oil and putting lubricant into the bottles instead. But he would notice and he would obsessively return it to being baby oil that was strictly used. So there's another thing that's similar to a cult where people are having to put their health on the line for the cult leader. And this is very similar in the Playboy situation. So, again, in cults, people often put their health on the line through control, through being coerced. They're discouraged to use certain medicines. They are forced to be isolated, sometimes follow strict dietary regimens, and they are told to seek alternative healthcare approaches. And even though that's not word for word exactly what happened in the mansion, they were all expected to follow a very strict diet or to get liposuction or to starve themselves. And Hugh Hefner would comment on the girl's body weight if he noticed any fluctuation. That happened to Crystal one time when she was getting comfortable when she first moved into the mansion because there's a chef downstairs that can cook whatever meal you want. And that was something she had not experienced before. So she said she went up to like a whopping 135 or 137 pounds. And Hugh Hefner instantly commented on it. And she saw it as a sign to either lose weight or get out of the mansion. And I was saying whopping sarcastically because that is an average weight for somebody in America. I don't think that that is heavy at all to be 135 or 137. And later, Crystal continued to her health declined. She said doctors were starting to see more and more women who'd had implants put in years before were showing up with these mysterious and hard to pin down clusters of symptoms, but they all pointed to an autoimmune disruption, the body turning against itself. I remember the surgery I'd had in my first year at the mansion when the surgeon had talked about my body attacking the implant, building scar tissue around it. I remember how the scar tissue looked when they sliced me open, pulled out the inflatable silicone bags, and scraped my tissue off it like hamburger, and then they'd put it right back in. So Crystal actually had health issues following her breast implants that were placed in by Hugh Hefner's personal plastic surgeon that he had for the girls. And she also ended up contracting Lyme's disease. I'm not saying she got that in the mansion, but her body was just becoming weaker and weaker. And later they found that there was black mold in the mansion that was making all of them sick, which really just points out the fact that Hugh Hefner didn't seem to care about anyone's health, let alone his own health. And he was not, maybe not in the best state of mind. Both Crystal and Holly Madison describe him as somewhat of a hoarder. He's getting a little senile. They're also all just putting their health on the line for somebody that doesn't even know how to take care of himself. And I find the next part so important to talk about. There's one part in her book, Down the Rabbit Hole, where Holly Madison talks about how she was naive when she first moved into the mansion and was getting sick of Hef wanting all the girls to look like clones, because this part really illuminates how much Hef didn't care about the girls' personalities, who they were, what their dreams were. He just wanted them to be objects. He wanted them to all look the same, all look like his liking. And she says in her book, I was cracking under the pressure of living at the mansion and resented the fact that everyone had to look like such a clone. Save for the blonde hair, the big boobs, and our shared address, I had absolutely nothing in common with these girls. So why should we have to look like we were carbon copies of one another? I decided to take it upon myself to embrace a more retro aesthetic, a look that captured the old Hollywood glamour I was fascinated with. Think more Marilyn, less Pamela. One sunny afternoon, I decided to do the unthinkable, chop off all my hair. I drove directly to the hair salon and instructed my stylist to cut off about 20 inches of platinum blonde hair. It was a drastic move, but I felt liberated by my short new coif. While all the girls were in a race to see who could have the longest hair possible, I had a flirty chin-length bob. I completed the look by having the hairdresser and makeup artist style me like Marilyn Monroe. Though I was making the change for me, I was also sure that Hef wouldn't mind. After all, he worshipped Marilyn. I stood up and straightened out my white, juicy couture jumpsuit when he finally appeared in the doorway. What did you do? He spat at me. Instantly, I was taken aback. I got a little makeover, I said sheepishly, giving a slight pat to my new hair. Well, I thought you would like it. Well, I don't, he hissed, taking a moment to analyze my new makeup and hair. Actually, I hate it. I hate the whole look. I hate the makeup, and I hate the red lipstick. Don't ever wear red lipstick again. You look old, hard, and cheap. So I shortened some of this to just make it more clear, but it goes to show that
He was very critical if the girls try to step out of line and look different from one another. He didn't want them to express themselves in any way, shape, or form, and that was that.
Crystal stated in her book, "My job was to look a certain way and to act a certain way." Hugh Hefner had always had girlfriends, tangible proof to the rest of the world that he was the man. So my job was to embody the ideal girlfriend, and I wanted to do it flawlessly. I was happy, fawning, and there when I was needed. Hef's interests were my interests. My interests were irrelevant. Which, just take a moment to think about that. Hef's girlfriends were usually in their early 20s, which is wild because that's a fundamental age to figuring out who you are, what you want to do with your life, what your hobbies are, what your boundaries are. A lot of that is learned in your 20s, in your early years. A lot of people think, well, why didn't they just leave?
And there's more reasons than you might expect. Of course, there's the obvious reason that some of these girls wanted fame and fortune or security. However, these girls were not paid well at all. Contrary to popular belief, if you saw the reality TV show in the 2000s, The Girl Next Door, Hef was paid approximately 44 grand per episode, and the girls in the first season were not paid anything, which you might be wondering, how is that even legal? But when the girls asked the producers the same thing about why they weren't getting paid anything, the producers explained that they were merely replaceable. Any girl would take their place in a heartbeat. And then, as later seasons came to be, the girls were paid about $1,000 per episode. So they were absolutely exploited by Hugh Hefner and his company. Holly Madison said that Kendra Wilkinson, one of the girls in the first season of The Girls Next Door, who would continue to be in later seasons, stated, "Shouldn't we be getting paid for doing the show?" It really was a valid question. The response she received was not what any of us were expecting to hear. One of the producers took a deep breath and suddenly became very firm. "You are replaceable." That would become the unofficial model of Girls Next Door for seasons to come. This is not a show about the girls who live at the Playboy Mansion. It's about Hugh Hefner and who he chooses to date. It's not about any of you. We were constantly reminded that the show was Hef's show. Our contributions were irrelevant. We were decorative icing, not the cake. According to our boyfriend, he could have splashed any three blondes on screen and found instant success.
Then there's dependence on Hugh Hefner. He didn't really even pay the girls too much, so there was financial dependence. Over the years, Hugh Hefner had gotten a little wiser after dating several eager, dreamy blondes. He had learned to be frugal in a way because he had learned from the past that if every girl who moved into the mansion could quickly build a money pot or a bird's nest, they'd be out the door and onto something better to pursue their dreams. Equally, he learned that if every girl was offered a Playboy magazine cover as a pinup girl, they could promptly leave his place as arm candy as well. So he made sure girls depended on them. He never gave them too much money. If he bought them a car, it was actually his if they left. They didn't get to take the car with them. He only paid each girl $1,000 a week. And in LA, that's actually not that much money if you think about it. Not only that, he was very particular about where the girls could shoot photos for. One time, Holly Madison was actually selected to do, I forget if it was a cover girl shoot, but it was for Hooters. She worked for Hooters briefly as she was getting her foot in the door at the Playboy Mansion. And she entered some kind of contest and was actually chosen out of hundreds of girls to do a Hooters cover shoot. And Hugh Hefner really put his foot down and said that he didn't want her doing it, and she abided. But that's just one example of the control tactic that he would use to not let the girls get other opportunities in a way that they would depend on him. And they would put pleasing him above pleasing other companies. So he always had to be number one. And if they didn't accommodate his wishes, they were kicked out. So we talked about the financial exploitation. He also withdrew the opportunity sometimes for the Playmates, especially later on, to be in the magazine for Playboy. He wouldn't let them have their own spread. He would put down their looks. So they were depending on him when they first moved into the mansion. They thought it was going to promise them opportunity to be featured as models, but he had learned long ago that he didn't want them to get those opportunities right away, even if it was in for his own magazine. Again, what if they got noticed by somebody bigger or somebody that could give them another opportunity that they thought was worth leaving the mansion for? So he took away financial opportunity as well as opportunity for fame. Even though Crystal Hefner, or Crystal Harris, I should say, and Holly Madison state that they didn't do drugs, they stated that the drug of choice among the Mansion girls was definitely cocaine. And he himself, again, carried Quaaludes and offered them to young girls he would meet. And he would even say they were called thigh openers. There was also a sense of dependence for some of these girls. It was written that a lot of the girls did use substances in the Playboy Mansion, that drugs were everywhere. So there's also the chance that there was a addictive dependence to the Playboy Mansion. And that's another thing that we see with pimps or cults, is using substances to control the people that are following you. So the Playboy Mansion, obviously, it's not officially a cult, but you can see a lot of the similarities. It shared a lot of the same patterns. One powerful central figure, which was Hugh Hefner, control over daily life. The girls couldn't date other men, while Hugh Hefner could date as many women as he wanted.
In fact, Hugh Hefner was also known for sending his security guards and private investigators to spy on the girls that were part of his life at one point or another. And in her book, Holly Madison describes one of her first nights alone away from Hugh Hefner, one of her first nights alone ever since she moved into the mansion, which is insane to think about because she moved in when she was 22, I believe. And she decides to go out and explore as a 20-year-old should. And she's in Las Vegas for the night because she has a photo shoot there. So Hugh Hefner agrees to let her stay the night before she flies back to him in the mansion. And the next day, he yells at her saying, "Thank you for giving me the worst night of my life." And as it turned out, Hugh Hefner had actually had somebody follow Holly Madison the only night that she wasn't staying at the mansion. And Holly Madison that night had hung out with Chris Angel, who she would later go on to date. So Hugh Hefner was not happy about that. Luckily, Holly Madison was slowly working up to a place in her life where she felt like she was starting to grow a name for herself and able to start making plans to leave, and had already been planning to leave him anyway. But with any other girl, he would have just swiftly kicked them out. And another thing that's very cult-like is that once you're kicked out of the mansion, opportunities for you might be sparse. Hugh Hefner has a lot of connections. He could also use people that work underneath him to try to convince you to come back, whether that's using money to entice you, or he could really try to just slander your name to the media. There's also an instance in Crystal's book where she discusses doing an entire magazine Playboy cover shoot for the magazine, and then she gets handed a very insulting $2,500 when other people are getting paid thousands of dollars more than she did. And when she brought that up to Hugh Hefner, he coolly smiled at her and said, "Well, what are you here for?" Yeah, as if she should just be willing to do a cover shoot for Playboy for the whole world to see for pennies because she's his girlfriend and lives in his house and should prove her loyalty to him, that she should just be exploited. And at this point, she's so furious that she just starts grabbing all her stuff and running out the mansion. But by the time she gets to the gate, Hugh Hefner is on the loudspeaker microphone saying, "Close the back gate. If Crystal tries to leave, detain her." So not only are there curfews where you have to be home by 9 or 6 p.m., depending on what day it is, he would actually detain girls from leaving his mansion. And to add to the cultiness, Hugh Hefner never officially proposed to Crystal. He just gave her a ring, and it was expected that she would say yes. And this was a huge deal. She was very conflicted about this because she felt that this wasn't a real proposal. And at one point, she left the mansion, this time succeeding, and she was dating Dr. Phil's son. And she eventually came back because the relationship didn't work out and married Hugh Hefner. But the prenup deal was so bad that the first lawyer wouldn't even sign the prenup form because it was such a bad deal for Crystal. And she just bit the bullet, and they had a very staged wedding.
So that's kind of what I have for you today. And I am curious to know what you thought about this episode. Did you like this topic?
You want to hear more about the Playboy stories? And yeah, I hope to see you in the next episode. Have a good day. Stay safe. Thanks for watching.